We're opening the files today on, well, one of the most brilliant and truly complex figures of the 20th century, the American mathematician John Forbes Nash Jr.
His life, spanning from 1928 to 2015, is just this profound story of monumental scientific achievement, but it's also shadowed by this immense personal struggle.
And when you look at the sources, the scope of his work is just extraordinary. I mean, he's one of a tiny handful of people to win the highest awards in two completely different fields.
That's right. He won the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences back in 1994, and then much later the Abel Prize, which is essentially the Nobel for mathematics, in 2015.
That dual recognition right there, it just signals the sheer breadth of what he did. This isn't a case of someone making one big splash. He was laying groundwork in totally separate areas.
Fundamentally, when you survey his contributions, you see foundational work in four distinct, massive fields. First, there's game theory, which is what most people know him for.
Right.
But then you have real algebraic geometry, differential geometry, and the theory of partial differential equations, or PDEs.
So his influence is everywhere, from theoretical economics all the way to the deepest, most abstract concepts of geometry and analysis.
Exactly.
But to really get the full picture, you have to look at the personal context. I mean, his life story, his long, difficult struggle with schizophrenia, that became internationally known through Sylvia Nasar's biography and then the film A Beautiful Mind.
I did. And you really can't separate the genius from the struggle.
Yeah.
It's a necessary part of understanding his full trajectory.
His battle with mental illness tragically hit right when he should have been at his most productive.
And yet the work he did before the illness and the methods he developed, they just fundamentally altered several academic landscapes.
So our purpose here is to really explore those academic milestones, to get into the papers, the theorems, and at the same time try to understand how his personal journey interacted with his intellectual output, to extract what this material tells us about genius, about method, and about resilience. Okay, so let's start at the beginning, tracing his early life, because the path he took toward mathematics, it wasn't a straight line.
Not at all. He was born June 13, 1928, in Bluefield, West Virginia. His father was an electrical engineer, his mother a school teacher. He was baptized in the Episcopal Church.
And he went to what's now Carnegie Mellon University on a George Westinghouse scholarship. But his major wasn't math.
No. He started in chemical engineering.
Chemical engineering, that's, miles away from abstract geometry or non-cooperative game theory.
It is. Then he switched to chemistry. It was only after his teacher, a notable mathematical physicist named John Lytton Synge, pulled him aside and advised him to switch that he finally moved to mathematics.
So Synge must have seen something. Some kind of latent, powerful talent there.
He clearly did.
Yeah.
In that conversation, it seems like that was really the pivotal moment that set him on his ultimate intellectual course.
And once he found that path, he didn't waste any time.
Not a bit. He was an exceptionally rapid learner. He graduated in 1948 with both a bachelor's and a master's degree in math.
Wow, both degrees at once.
That kind of rapid progression immediately set him up for the next step, graduate school at an elite institution.
And the story of how he got to Princeton is also, it's very telling about his character, isn't it? He had his pick of the top schools.
He did. Harvard, Chicago, Michigan, they all accepted him.
Yeah.
But he chose Princeton.
Why Princeton?
Well, the chairman of the math department there, Solomon Lefschetz, offered him the John S. Kennedy Fellowship. And Nash sort of calculated that this meant Princeton valued him more than the others did.
So it was a strategic choice, almost like a move in one of his own games.
You could see it that way, yes.
Yeah.
He wanted the environment where he felt his genius would be most appreciated.
And that feeling was mutual. The recommendation letter from his old professor, Richard Duffin, is legendary for how short and powerful it is.
It is. All it said was, "This man is a mathematical genius."
Just that, no fluff.
And that kind of praise set the stage for one of the most profound contributions to economic theory ever made by a graduate student. Which brings us right to the game theory revolution.
Right. He got his PhD in 1950 with this famously short dissertation. It was only 28 pages, titled Non-Cooperative Games.
And inside those 28 pages was the concept that would later define his entire public reputation and win him the Nobel Prize: the Nash equilibrium.
Let's break that down, because I think a lot of people have heard the name but might not grasp its power. What exactly is it?
Okay, so the Nash equilibrium is the foundational concept for analyzing non-cooperative games. These are situations where players act independently without any kind of binding agreements, just to maximize their own personal payoff.
And the equilibrium itself is a stable state.
Exactly, a stable state. Imagine a game with two or more players. An outcome is a Nash equilibrium if, once you're there, no single player can do any better by unilaterally changing their own strategy.
As long as everyone else stays put.
As long as everyone else stays put. So you're locked in, because if you move on your own, you're actually worse off.
It's the mathematical formwork for predicting what happens when rational people act purely in their own self-interest.
Precisely. And that's why it's so vital. It's the intellectual architecture for everything from, say, auction design and trade wars to arms races.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because this idea kind of challenges the traditional economic view from Adam Smith, right? The idea that individual self-interest somehow magically leads to the common good.
It's a direct challenge. That's the revolutionary insight. Smith's invisible hand suggests individual optimization benefits the group. Nash's work proves that when players optimize only for themselves, they often land in a stable equilibrium that is suboptimal for the group as a whole.
The classic example being the prisoner's dilemma.
Exactly. Both prisoners acting rationally in their own self-interest leads to a worse outcome for both of them than if they just cooperated.
So the Nash equilibrium is the mathematical proof for why individually rational behavior can lead to collective irrationality.
That's it. And that's why this elegant concept from a young grad student is central not just to economics, but political science, military strategy, even evolutionary biology. Any system with competing agents.
And he didn't stop there with game theory.
No. In the early 50s, he also tackled cooperative games where agreements are possible. He developed what's called the Nash bargaining solution.
And what's that?
It's basically a framework for figuring out how two rational players should divide the gains from cooperating, when they both want to cooperate, but they disagree on how to split the prize.
It's just staggering that all of this work, done in his early 20s, was the basis for his Nobel Prize decades later in 1994. I mean, that alone guarantees immortality in the field.
It does, a singular achievement in itself.
Now, if Nash had just stopped right there with game theory, his name would still be etched into history forever. But what the sources make so clear is that his mind it wouldn't stay put. It drove him into the deepest waters of pure mathematics.
This transition really solidified during his time at MIT after his PhD. And while the results he found are often described using the language of geometry, his work in differential geometry and partial differential equations is really rooted in extremely advanced mathematical analysis.
It shows this incredible versatility.
A mastery that just transcended boundaries.
Okay, so let's get into this pure math phase, starting with his work in something called real algebraic geometry, or ARG.
This brings us to a result called Nash's theorem from around 1951. Now, to get why it was so surprising, you have to understand a little bit about manifolds. A smooth manifold is basically a mathematical space, like the surface of a sphere, that locally it looks like regular flat space.
And these are defined by smooth functions, which are incredibly flexible, right? You can draw almost any shape with them.
Exactly. And it was known that any closed smooth manifold was equivalent to the zero set of some collection of smooth functions. But Nash proved something much, much stricter. He proved that those complicated smooth functions could actually be replaced by simple polynomials.
Wait, polynomials, like from high school algebra, the ones that are far more rigid and structured than general smooth functions.
The very same. The constraint of using only polynomials is enormous compared to using all smooth functions. He basically showed that the world of smooth geometry can be captured perfectly using just the tools of algebraic geometry.
And why was that so important? What came out of it?
Well, it introduced concepts like the Nash function and the Nash manifold. It showed that the underlying structure of smoothness was much more algebraic than anyone suspected. And later, this became fundamental for people like Michael Artin and Barry Mazur in their study of dynamical systems. It proved its relevance far beyond pure geometry.
Okay, so from there, he moves to differential geometry, and this is where we get the famous Nash embedding theorems. He was going after a really big open problem.
He was. The central question was this: can any Riemannian manifold, and you can just think of that as any curved space where you can measure distances like space-time or a complex surface, can it be realized isometrically as a part of a simpler, flat Euclidean space?
So can you take a complicated curved surface and just place it inside our regular 3D world or a higher dimensional version without distorting any of the distances on its surface? That's what isometric means, right? Distance preserving.
Precisely. It's about whether intrinsic curvature can always be translated into extrinsic curvature.
And the sources say he solved this in two separate steps, with totally different methods.
They did. The first embedding theorem came in 1953. Nash showed the embedding is possible, but only if you're okay with the mapping being just continuously differentiable.
Meaning the surface is smooth enough to touch, but the geometry, like the curvature, might be kind of jagged in places.
That's a good way to put it, yes. Highly irregular. Now, this result was later extended into the Nash-Kuiper theorem, which was very powerful in its own right.
But for mainstream differential geometry, they often need a much higher degree of smoothness, infinitely differentiable.
Right, that's the tension.
Yeah.
But the techniques he developed for that first theorem, particularly the method called convex integration, turned out to be incredibly influential.
And what did that lead to outside of geometry?
It had massive, unexpected applications in fluid mechanics. It was used to construct non-smooth, sort of turbulent solutions to the Euler equations, which describe the flow of fluids. So by solving a geometry problem, he accidentally gave analysts a tool to understand why things like turbulence can be so messy and non-smooth.
But the second theorem, that was the real mountain to climb, proving the smoothly differentiable embedding.
This was, as the sources say, unexpectedly difficult. It took him about a year and a half of intense, focused work, and the proof is famously complex.
What was the conceptual breakthrough? What was the big problem he had to solve?
It was something called the loss of regularity phenomenon. In many complex nonlinear problems, when you try to use standard methods to smooth out a solution step by step, each step actually makes the solution rougher. You lose smoothness faster than you gain it.
It's like trying to polish a stone, but every time you rub it, it gets scratchier.
That's the perfect analogy. So standard tools just failed. And Nash's solution was considered completely novel. He introduced a technique of continually injecting extra regularity.
How did that work?
Instead of just applying a correction, he coupled the process to an ordinary differential equation, an ODE. And this ODE acted as a kind of smoothing mechanism, constantly injecting regularity back into the solution as it was being corrected, preventing that fatal loss.
That sounds like a whole new way of thinking in mathematical analysis.
It absolutely was. It led directly to what's now called the Nash-Moser theorem, which is a fundamental tool for solving extremely complex nonlinear equations where nothing else works.
The recognition for this was huge. The American Mathematical Society gave him the Leroy P. Steele Prize in 1999, calling it one of the great achievements in mathematical analysis in this century.
And the legendary geometric analyst, Michael Gromov, said the result was one of the main achievements of mathematics of the 20th century, and that the work opened up a new world of mathematics.
Incredible. And he wasn't done. He then turned his focus to partial differential equations, or PDEs.
Right, to solve Hilbert's 19th problem, which had been an open question for almost 60 years.
What was the problem?
It's about the smoothness of solutions in the calculus of variations. So if you're trying to find a shape that, say, minimizes surface area and you find a solution, the question is that solution automatically smooth and beautiful, geometrically speaking?
And Nash solved it.
He did. He extended a previous result by Charles Morey to functions of more than two variables and also to a different type of PDE called parabolic equations. His work was published in 57 and 58.
And this is the story with the simultaneous discovery, right?
The extraordinary twist. He found out that an Italian mathematician, Ennio de Giorgi, had found nearly identical results for the same problem at the same time, working completely independently.
Wow. Two people tackling the same 60-year-old problem at the same time with different methods.
Yes. Nash's method was based on something called the heat kernel. De Giorgi's was different, but they both got there. The combined work is now known as the de Giorgi-Nash theorem, and it's the definitive solution to Hilbert's 19th problem.
Peter Lax called Nash's work here a stroke of genius. And Nash himself later speculated that if de Giorgi hadn't discovered it at the same time, he probably would have won the Fields Medal in 1958.
Which archival research confirms, actually. He placed third in the voting. It was just world-changing work.
And before we move on, there's this quick, fascinating sidebar about cryptography.
Right. In 2011, the NSA declassified letters from the 1950s where Nash proposed a new encryption machine. And in these letters, he basically anticipated the core concepts of modern cryptography.
The idea of computational hardness, that it's easy to encrypt but almost impossible to decrypt without the key.
Exactly. He was thinking in terms of what we now call trapdoor functions, decades before they were formally invented. It's just another example of this staggering forward-looking intellect.
So, having mapped out this immense landscape of intellectual triumph, we have to shift our focus. We have to turn to the profound personal struggle that began to cast a shadow over his life. And we need to approach the subject of his schizophrenia with the sympathy and gravity it deserves.
The mental disturbances really started in early 1959, and tragically, this was right around the time his wife, Alicia Larday, was pregnant with their son.
The symptoms started as paranoia.
Pervasive paranoia, yes, which then quickly developed into complex persecutory delusions and auditory hallucinations.
And these were very specific. The sources mentioned he believed that men wearing red ties were part of a crypto-communist party conspiring against him.
Yes, and that paranoia was often mixed with grandiose delusions. He sent these bizarre letters to embassies in Washington, D.C., declaring he was establishing a new government,
Signing them, John Nash, Emperor of Antarctica.
and referring to himself in the third person as Johann von Nassau.
And this, sadly, spilled over into his professional life in a very public and shocking way.
It did. It happened during a lecture at Columbia University in early 1959. He was supposed to be presenting a proof of the Riemann hypothesis, one of the hardest problems in math.
But instead,
Instead, the lecture was just deeply incoherent. It was so infused with his delusions that his colleagues in the audience immediately realized how severely ill he was. For that community, which prizes intellectual clarity above all, it was just a devastating public breakdown.
and that led to his first commitment in April 1959 to McLean Hospital.
That's where he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, based on the delusions, the paranoia, the hallucinations, and his withdrawal from society.
The next 9 years were just this horrific cycle of being in and out of psychiatric hospital.
Yes, places like the New Jersey State Hospital at Trenton. He received both antipsychotic medications, which were much cruder back then, and also insulin shock therapy.
From his later writings, we know he was very resistant to medication.
He was. He wrote that he only ever took it under immense pressure.
This period must have just been devastating for his family. His wife, Alicia, actually divorced him in 1963.
She did. The stress of dealing with his severe and chronic illness was just overwhelming. But, and this is crucial, the tide slowly started to turn after 1970.
And this is where the story shifts toward resilience. How did his recovery begin, especially if he wasn't taking medication or being hospitalized anymore?
Well, after 1970, he stopped taking medication and he was never committed again. And he began this very gradual, self-directed recovery, which was crucially supported by Alicia.
His ex-wife.
Yes. In an extraordinary act of loyalty, she allowed him to come back and live in her house as a boarder. She later credited his recovery to maintaining a quiet life with that social support and routine.
And during this time, he also found a kind of sanctuary at the Princeton Mathematics Department.
The department showed remarkable tolerance and acceptance. Even when his condition was very poor, he would spend his days wandering the halls of Fine Hall, the math building.
This is where he got the name the Phantom of Fine Hall.
Yes, because he'd be seen, often late at night, scribbling these dense, arcane equations on the blackboards.
Was it? Was it still mathematics? Or was it just nonsense?
From what people said, it was often a mix. Intense, disorganized calculations that would weave together highly advanced concepts with totally delusional content. But the foundation was still recognizably mathematical.
And this stability, this acceptance, it eventually seemed to allow him to wrestle with his illness on his own terms.
It did. He described making a conscious, intellectual decision to reject the voices and the delusional systems that he had started hearing around 1964.
He called it enforced rationality.
Yes, he said that even during hospitalization, he could sometimes suppress the delusional thoughts just long enough to do productive work. But the key to his long-term recovery was something deeper.
An intellectual rejection.
Exactly. This is the most fascinating part of his recovery. He said he eventually intellectually rejected his delusional thinking, starting with the political ones. He came to see them as a hopeless waste of intellectual effort.
So he essentially used his scientific mind to defeat his illness. He decided that delusion was just bad science.
That's a perfect way to put it. He consciously chose rationality, viewing the voices as inconsistent data. And in a very powerful reflection in 1995, he acknowledged that he'd failed to reach his full potential because of the nearly 30 years lost to illness. It's just a devastating thing for a mind like that to realize.
He also speculated about the connection between his intense intellect and his condition, saying something like, "I wouldn't have had good scientific ideas if I had thought more normally." It shows how deeply he was analyzing his own mind.
A truly complex relationship between genius and pathology.
So despite the lost decades, the story doesn't end in silence. It ends with this incredible resurgence of recognition, and then, sadly, a tragic final chapter.
By the late 1980s, his condition had stabilized enough for an academic comeback. He was moving from being the phantom of Fine Hall back toward being a respected researcher.
And technology helped with this, right?
It did. He started using email to connect with younger working mathematicians. They were able to review his newer work, confirm its value, and crucially, they vouched for his mental health to the Nobel Committee.
And that advocacy worked. In 1994, he received the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences for the game theory work he'd done 4 decades earlier.
It was recognition that had been long delayed, partly because the committee had struggled with awarding the prize to someone whose mental state had been so unstable for so long.
He also gathered other major awards during this period, like the John von Neumann Theory Prize and the Leroy P. Steele Prize for the embedding theorems.
It was a symbol of his return to the community.
And he didn't just rest on his laurels. His later work ventured into advanced game theory and also into economic philosophy.
Yes, he became a notable critic of Keynesian ideas and central banking.
Proposing this concept of ideal money. What was the core idea there?
It came from a deep skepticism of fiat currency and the inflation caused by central banks. He argued money should be a stable unit of measurement, independent of political manipulation.
And how would you achieve that stability?
He suggested pegging it to an industrial consumption price index, which would measure the real cost of industrial goods and energy. It would be a more stable anchor for value than gold or, the decisions of a central banker.
Which sounds a lot like the thinking of economists like Friedrich Hayek.
It parallels it very closely, yes. It just shows that even in his later years, he was still engaging with these huge global debates with his own rigorous proposals.
And then the capstone of his mathematical recognition arrived in 2015.
Yes. In 2015, just days before he died, he was awarded the Abel Prize, along with Louis Nierenberg, for his seminal contributions to the theory of nonlinear partial differential equations, the work on Hilbert's 19th problem.
It was the necessary recognition for his pure math breakthroughs, which had been overshadowed for so long by the Nobel in economics.
It was.
And tragically, the receipt of that prize marked the very end of his story.
It did. On May 23, 2015, while returning home from the awards ceremony in Norway, he and his wife, Alicia, were killed.
A car accident on the New Jersey Turnpike.
Yes. The taxi driver lost control and hit a guardrail. In a truly heartbreaking detail, neither John nor Alicia were wearing seatbelts. They were both ejected from the vehicle and killed.
A profoundly sudden and tragic end for a couple who had endured so much together and had finally found some measure of peace and recognition. It's just devastating. John Forbes Nash Jr.'s life is this unparalleled case study in genius and in human resilience. We've covered his 4 fundamental contributions: game theory, real algebraic geometry, differential geometry, and PDEs. Any one of those would have guaranteed his place in history.
And we have to remember the cultural impact. His status as the phantom of Fine Hall, sheltered by the Princeton community, and the human recognition brought by a beautiful mind.
And the insights go beyond just the math. Nash himself, when reflecting on his illness, put forward these views that connected non-standard behavior, being insane, to being on strike from a societal point of view.
He was advancing ideas in evolutionary psychology about the potential, maybe accidental, benefits of these apparently non-standard behaviors, suggesting that these cognitive deviations might be linked to the very same processes that lead to radically new breakthroughs.
And that leads to a really powerful thought for you, the listener, to consider. Nash showed that breakthroughs often come from seeing problems from a radically different angle. If you take his perspective on rejecting delusion, that it was a hopeless waste of intellectual effort, it suggests something profound.
It suggests that the same mind that could recognize these deeply complex patterns, like a Nash equilibrium or the need for iterative injection in the embedding theorems, might also, by its very nature, be predisposed to seeing patterns and connections that others would call completely delusional.
The line that separates revolutionary intellectual progress from unconventional or even pathological thinking seems, in his case, to have been extraordinarily thin.
His life really asks us whether stepping outside of acceptable or normal thought patterns is sometimes a prerequisite for that truly fundamental progress, the kind of leap that changes how we model the world.
It's a reminder that exceptional vision often requires paying an exceptional price.
A truly complex legacy of logic and struggle.
Thanks for listening.